Excellent. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Angela. I work in Onkaparinga Libraries in South Australia. And today we've got with us Claire, who's in New Zealand. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
That's okay. The little chat beforehand was quite interesting. Before we get really into the interview, I'd like to say if you have any questions that you would like to ask of Claire, at the bottom of your screen there's a Q&A button that you can click on and ask your questions, and then I'll ask any questions that come through to Claire a bit later. If you can't see the Q&A button, it's because it's hidden. You just have to move your mouse around, then it will highlight itself, because it's like the ribbon disappears very well. I don't know why it does that, because it's not very user friendly, but there you go. If you would like to put this book on hold, because it's only just so new being released, it's only just been released this last week, and in fact in New Zealand where Claire is, she can't even get a copy in the shops, so we're all still waiting for the book. But you can put it on hold by coming into any South Australian library, specifically Onkaparinga Libraries, because that's where we are. You could give us a call on the phone and do an online. But if you wanted to buy your own copy, you can buy it at Glenelg, at Dimmock's down there. I'm sure all the other bookshops have it too, but we like to say a special mention for Dimmock's Glenelg, because they support all our author talks and make sure they have all the books in stock. So that's really good. What else do I need to say here? Oh, yes, thank you to Simon and Schuster for giving us the opportunity to chat to Claire today. And of course, thank you, Claire, for joining us, taking some time out of your day and being here with us.
Oh, kia ora.
So I understand this is your first novel, so that's very exciting.
Yeah.
And this is your very first talk about your book too, so
that's
doubly
right. I've
exciting.
never done this before.
Doubly exciting for us. So we were thinking, because we haven't got the book here yet or anything like that, that Claire is going to read a little bit from the book to entice you to put it on hold. So I'll pass over to you, Claire, and you can get started.
Thanks, Angela. Kia ora, thanks for coming, thanks for having me. And I just would like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the country that you're on, the Kaurna people, and also tangata whenua here, so the elders of the area where I am, down the bottom of the North Island in Wellington in Aotearoa. So I'm just going to read a bit of the beginning. This is how weather came. They were out in it, the two of them, yelling and laughing till they choked on the rain. Then they were quiet, just standing in it. Dust to mud under their feet and the smell of wet pulling up memories like fish. Lee fell against Frank and he licked rain off her. I bloody told you, he said with his mouth on hers. Didn't I tell you we weren't going anywhere? Yeah? Well, it better stop soon or it's going to wash everything away. You're a hard woman to please. They danced a bit, tried to. Slow mud circles with the rain running them together. She couldn't tell if it was his hair plastered against her forehead or her own. He turned his face up to the rain. Let's go and get her. They'd talked about it before, tried to imagine what it would be like for Matty the first time, and Lee could hear his regret that she wasn't with them now. But she wanted to go inside with him, wet like they were. Pulled him towards the door with her hands at his belt. And then, over his shoulder, she saw Maddie running down the driveway towards them, running hard through the rain as if it was something to shelter from. When she got close enough, Lee saw that she was crying. It irritated her that Maddie was having this reaction and not the one they'd imagined for her. It's all right, she said. You don't have to be scared of it. Frank crouched down in the mud. What's wrong, Beansprout? And Maddie said, Robbie went past the bend and he won't come back. Robbie was Carl and Angie's boy, a quicksilver kid with a light in his eyes that came straight from his mother. He was 6 and Maddie was 5, and they lived for the same things: matches and pocket knives and secret hideouts. When they were together, you couldn't break in. His fast grin was just for her. Lee had thought they were at Angie and Carl's, and Angie thought they were with Lee. They'd been playing in the stormwater pipe for weeks, and nobody knew. And Maddie and Robbie, they didn't know what it was for. Who would have thought to tell them? Neither of them had ever seen rain. The drain gate had rusted through. It wasn't hard to lever it up and drop down into the cavity under the road, where the dry concrete pipes led off on either side. The two of them had been going down there after school, taking torches and lollies and leftover sandwiches, chalking how far they got and daring each other to go further. When the air turned thick and electric just after 4 o'clock, they hadn't felt it. Didn't see the sky fatten like a bruise, bringing people outside to look up and remember. Maddie was at the first bend and Robbie was up ahead in the dark. He'd just yelled back that he'd passed her chalk mark when she wet herself. She hadn't known until right then that she needed to go. She started shuffling backwards without telling him she was leaving. "Why not?" Frank asked later. And Maddie, head down. "Because I peed?" It was so easy for Lee to imagine her down there, with her undies and the front of her t-shirt soaked, elbows raw and stinging, overwhelmed by shame because Robbie would have to crawl through it too. And when Maddie came out backwards into the heavy purple light, that was harder to imagine. Did the world smell changed? How did she make sense of the water that started leaking and then flooding from the sky? The noise of it. She told Frank, "I thought I'd got to the sea." She said she called to Robbie down the tunnel, but she couldn't even hear her own voice.
That was beautiful. Really well written, and yeah, just I could really feel myself being there at that moment. So I hope everyone in the audience enjoyed that as well. I was just reading before about, obviously, a bit about your life, and I read that you had been a travel writer before,
Yeah.
and you wrote for journals.
Yeah, both of those are true.
So what made you decide to write a novel?
Well, you're right. I have done travel writing and I have published short stories written for journals. I hadn't done a whole lot of either of those, to be honest. But like most unpublished writers, I've got things in the drawer. So I've written a couple of longer things before. I think in my 20s I wrote a novella and a collection of short stories that just weren't very good, and I never did anything with that. But I remember at that age, I couldn't imagine having the sort of stamina to write something really long, or having enough to write about, I guess. And then I came here, and in my 30s, I did write a novel. I spent most of my 30s writing a novel, like a great big kids book. And I don't know if anyone writes for kids or has tried to write for kids, but it's really hard. I think it's a lot harder than writing for adults. Anyway, it was for me. But I battled on for a long time, and I had a kid, and lots of things stopped me, and I started again. But I finished that book, and I was really proud of that book, because I worked so hard on it. And I did send that off to a publisher, and they were quite interested. But in the end, there were just too many things wrong with it. I'd made too many mistakes. There were structural problems. There were all sorts of things that hadn't worked. And so they didn't take it. And I was really disheartened at that point. I sort of felt like I'd wasted a lot of time. And so I put that in the drawer too. But I'd had this other idea that wasn't for kids. And I sort of thought about it for a couple of years. And then in 2017, I got the chance to do a master's in creative writing here at the place called the Institute of Modern Letters, which is at Victoria University in Wellington. And so I brought this idea in, and what I worked out was that writing that other book for all those years had taught me how to write a book. So I learnt things. I didn't realise that I'd sort of learnt things about plot and character and structure and story arc and, you know, tension, all that kind of stuff. You know, before that, all of those things had been really difficult for me. I wrote quite short things, maybe 1,000 words, or, you know, I have an idea and I'd write it down. Yeah, and so all of that, even though I was writing something completely different, you know, this book, it all still applied. It sort of transferred across, and it gave me a kind of a kickstart, so that I wrote the first draft of this book in 8 months instead of 8 years. You know, which is not to say it wasn't harsh. I mean, it definitely was harsh. You sort of knowing what you want to do isn't the same thing as knowing, you know, what's going to happen, or, you know. But yeah, I think that previous book, that's what it was for. You know, it wasn't wasted, it turns out.
So do you think, because loads of people that we interview talk about doing some creative writing, so you learn a lot from the creative writing, but you feel like you learn a lot from your book, your previous book as well?
Yeah, I certainly didn't go into it with that intention. You know, I didn't think I could, I wasn't thinking I'm going to teach myself this. I thought I'm going to write this book and I'm going to publish this book. But yeah, I mean, because that was so hard, and because I was on my own doing it. I mean, my partner's a writer too, and so we spent a lot of time talking about that book. But yeah, it was something I was sort of battling away at, and I didn't really know. I mean, I read a lot. I've always read a lot, and of course you take things from other books and from other people, but it never really occurred to me to go and read a book on how to write or anything like that.
No.
I didn't understand actually until I did this course, this MA, how fast and how much you can learn when you're in a really rich environment. And so that was the other thing about doing that course, is it's a workshop, and there were 10 of us and a convener, and everybody was writing a book, and everybody's work was really different. But I went in, you know, I don't have a university education. I didn't, you know, before that. And I was with all these incredibly smart people who, most of whom had degrees, and they had a lot of theoretical understanding. They were more widely read than I was. And it was just amazing. You know, you're constantly talking about craft. And yeah, so I felt like that was it was sort of like racing down a tunnel for 8 months, but there's sort of windows on either side, so there's all this light coming in. It was really fantastic. And yeah, I felt really lucky. And I think this book would have taken me a lot longer, a lot longer without that.
Do you think you'll go back and fix your other book up?
Oh, I don't know. I was thinking, because, you know, thinking about this, about talking to you, I thought about it for the first time in a little while, actually. And I remember I was so devastated that this 80,000 words or whatever that I'd slaved over, that it didn't seem like it was going to have a life. I mean, the publisher that looked at it, they suggested changes that would have made it a book I wasn't really interested in writing. I mean, they were probably right about what I should have done, but I just didn't want to do that. And I still wouldn't want to do that. So I don't know, maybe. Yeah, maybe. I mean, I'm writing another book now, so I don't know. Maybe after that, but it was a good story.
Well, was the transition difficult going from the travel writing to writing a novel?
I guess, to be honest, I mean, career would be a really big word to use about the travel writing I did. You know, I entered some competition and I won something, and there was an editor there. It was a travel writing competition, and as a result of that, an editor, a really nice guy, at a newspaper in Auckland, said, "Do you want to write something for me?" And so I don't know how long, maybe about a year or so, I just used to, when I'd go on trips, mostly here, you know, mostly in Aotearoa, sometimes overseas, I'd say to him, "Oh, I'm going to do this. Shall I write a piece?" And he'd go, "Yeah, do that." And I'd write the piece, and he'd fix it up a little bit, and he'd publish it, and that was great. And then he moved on, and then I didn't have that relationship with the next person, and I just lost interest. I didn't keep doing it. So, yeah. So I don't know if I did enough travel writing to call myself an expert on that. But I mean, I was always writing short stories and just writing. So I guess with this one, I just had a kind of a drive, and I didn't know what was going to happen in the book, but I sort of knew the kind of book I wanted to write. And once I got into it, I don't know, I just was sort of able to sustain the drive, I think.
That's
Don't know
great.
if that answers the question.
No, it does. Yeah. I did have one other question because of what we were talking about earlier when you quite magnificently told us all that you bike to work.
Oh, I thought I was just telling you.
So what? Like, you obviously work outside of your writing. What do you do in your other day job?
Okay, well, that's sort of funny. I've had an office job, the same office job, for 15 years, which is, I think, 15 years longer than pretty much any previous job I've ever had. So I came to New Zealand. I actually started a law degree. I did 1 year of a law degree, and I was looking for a job that I could do on campus around this. And I saw an administration job at a creative writing course on campus. And I'd never done admin before, but I thought, oh, I'd like to work at a creative writing course because maybe that way I'll make a writing community here. I'd left my writing friends behind in Melbourne. So I applied for this job and convinced them that I really could do it, and I started doing that. And then at the end of that first year of law, I didn't keep going because I really wanted to write, and but I kept the job because it was part-time and meant that I could write. And I've been doing that job ever since, and that's where I went and did my MA. So after 10 years, it wasn't a plan. It's just after I'd been there for about 10 years, I thought, I'd really like to do that course. And I said, can I apply? And they said, oh, yeah, okay. And I'm still there.
Oh, that's funny. And did you have to do a lot of research to write this book?
I did. But again, I don't know if research is a kind of a generous description of it. I suppose this book it's the kind of the product of a lot of things I've been really preoccupied with pretty much all my adult life. You know, I don't know, sort of ideas about home, what home means to different people, and loss of home, and people looking for refuge, and climate change, and those are things that I've been reading about and talking to people about and thinking about and been sort of politically engaged with or active in for a really long time. So I suppose I kind of brought all that in. I didn't set out to write a book about all those things. I set out to write a book about a woman who was ambivalent about motherhood and a kind of a quest. I knew that she was going to be looking for her child. And I suppose just the world that grew up around that story, that quest, was full of all those things because they're the things I think about. So I guess research, there was maybe, I don't know, 20 years or so of thinking and reading and all of that came into it. I did have to do a lot of research. I know what you did there. I had to do a lot of research during the year because I kept coming up with things or deciding to do things and I didn't know how to do them. You know, I spent a lot of time. I mean, I read a lot of nonfiction. I read a lot of news reportage. I listened to a lot of podcasts, a lot of accounts of experience, that kind of thing. There was I think it was Europol. I think that's the European Union Police investigative organisation or something. They put out a report in 2016, the year before I did the course, that said that they estimated that 10,000 children under 18 had made it as far as the European mainland seeking refuge. They'd registered as refugees, they were on their own, and they'd disappeared. And that I was sort of obsessed with that story. I read everything I could about it. I couldn't understand why people weren't screaming about that. You know, it seemed, of course there were people investigating it and trying to find kids and all that sort of thing, but it seemed so quiet, you know, and that number is just a number that I couldn't get my head around. And so there were things like that were really significant for me in thinking about the book. But as far as practical things, you know, Lee, the main character, she's very she's very handy. She's very resourceful. She knows how to do a lot of things that I don't know how to do. And I had to learn a lot of those things. And I'm really, really grateful to all those people who make YouTube videos about things like, you know, how to convert a ute to fit truck wheels, or, you know, just anything. I was like, oh, I think we really need this to happen so that this can happen. I'll just go and see if anyone knows how to do that. I didn't spend a lot of time looking at things like that in the past, but those people are amazing. So yeah, I did a lot of that too.
With your main character, did you always set out to have a character that was strong, or did she evolve with the book?
I think, like I said, what I set out to write about, I wanted to write a really full, rich character, and I wanted to explore the idea of ambivalence in parenthood, and particularly in motherhood, because it wasn't something I saw reflected much in fiction. I mean, of course it's there, but it didn't. I wasn't seeing a lot of it, and certainly not in culture and popular culture. You know, there are a lot of ideas about mothers, and most of them seemed very unrealistic to me, especially after I became a parent. So that was what I started from. But it was just the kind of, a lot of the story was geography for me. I had some really clear ideas about places I wanted her to end up on her journey. And so I plotted it in that way. And the country was just harsh, the country where she was. And things were so hard that she had to be really strong. Otherwise, she wouldn't have made it through the book. You know? So yeah, she became, you know, I kept thinking, how is she going to survive this? How can she cope with that? How can I have her get through this without weakening the difficulty or lessening the difficulty? And so I had to keep making her somehow come up to the mark, while still somehow feeling like she was real. She wasn't a robot. She wasn't some, you know, crazy superhero. Yeah, but you know, the funny thing is, I've read the word tough about Lee, about this main character, a lot. And I understand it. She, you know, she is tough. But I wonder if she was a man, if people would say that. I was trying to think about that, thinking about quotes about characters, you know, and I was trying to think about people describing a male protagonist as being tough. I think people would be much more likely to comment if he was gentle, maybe, you know.
Yeah, I think you're right
yeah,
there.
you know, she is tough.
Yeah.
But she's sort of just doing what she has to, and what I guess a dad would do as well, you know. So yeah, so that's been an interesting thing for me, because I didn't think about that particularly. I didn't think she's going to be tough. She's going to be, you know, strong and mean, and, you know. But a lot of other people have noticed that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, well, that's all of my questions, and I can't wait to read the book myself. So I'm just going to see if there's any questions from the audience. So there is one here. They say, I love the names you have chosen for the characters we hear about at the start. Were those names easy to choose?
No, I'm terrible at names. I'm really bad at titles, and I'm really bad at names. A couple of them, Frank, who is Mattie's dad, probably the year before I wrote the book, I did a kind of a boot camp. I just went and set myself up in a room with some other people for 2 or 3 days and just wrote, you know, and I wrote, I don't know, 8,000 words or something. And I was just trying to get down ideas, and I didn't want to stop, and I didn't want to try and think about things. So when I had to describe this particular character, I just called him Frank. I don't know why. I just went, right, he's Frank. And that one just stuck. And there were a few times when I wondered if he should be called Frank, because he is quite a frank character, you know. And I thought, oh, I didn't mean that. But I sort of just ended up loving that name, and I didn't want to change it. Mattie, actually Mattie was, I'd forgotten about this. Mattie was the name of a heroic dog in the previous book I wrote. I'd totally forgotten about that, and I loved the name. And this dog was amazing. And maybe that was me not being able to let go of the other book. But also it means something, it's got a beautiful meaning. some sort of really strong heroic meaning. So I really like that. Funny thing though was that I noticed that I'd given many of my characters one-syllable names, and the people in my workshop group and then editors later were going, look, people are just going to get mixed up, give somebody a 2-syllable name or a 3-syllable name. And at one point I went through the whole book and wrote down the names of every character, and I was astounded by how many one-syllable names I'd come up with, and how many names I called about 3 characters versions of Lee, like names that sounded like Lee or whatever, and it was completely unintentional. So I finally had to make a list, and then I don't know, I fell back on people I know, or people I did call one character after a friend, a truck driver, the character, not the friend. And there are a couple of truck drivers in the book. One's very nice and one's not very nice. And I said to him, look, I've named a truckie after you, but it's the nice one. Is that okay? And he said that was okay. So I think.
Oh, that's excellent. Okay, so we have another question here. Which authors inspire your work?
Oh, inspire. That seems different to me from love. You know, I mean, there are obviously heaps of writers that I love, but inspiring my work, I think for inspiration, I look to writers who maybe are trying to show us something different, or show us something important, or maybe make some kind of change. Not in a didactic way, but actually, funny thing, there's a woman called Pamela Kerr, an Australian woman. I don't think I don't know, but I don't think she considers herself a writer. I don't think that's what she does. But she runs an email list called Just Freedom, I think. And she's run that list in various incarnations for at least all the time I've been here and before. So I don't know, maybe 20 years. I haven't had an email from her since last year. But she sends updates on the situation for refugees in Australia. And she sends links to news articles, she sends calls for urgent action, all kinds of things. And she was very, very active in that area when I was living in Australia. And as far as I'm aware, she just hasn't stopped. And I don't know if she considers herself a writer, but I find people like her really inspiring, because she has allowed somebody like me, who doesn't live in the country anymore, to stay connected to things that are happening, and to a sort of limited extent to have some involvement. You know, I can't turn up to an action, but I can write a submission, or, you know, and that kind of fortitude I find really inspiring, and that's using words. So, sorry, that's not a reading tip.
No, that's good.
But yeah, I do find people like that really inspiring. And I don't know, as a reading tip, I mean, there's so many writers I admire, but I was just thinking, there's a writer here in Aotearoa called Pip Adam, who she inspires me because I find her really brave as a writer. She is not afraid to experiment, and she does, she takes real risks, and I find that quite inspiring. You know, when you read somebody like that and you think, I could try that, or you don't have to do this. You know, she walks a really thin line sometimes between success and failure, or the idea of both, and I think that's amazing.
Yes. Are you reading any particular books at the moment?
I've got such a stack of books. Yeah, I've been having a really broken reading time, because for the first time in my life I've been doing sort of publicity, writing things for this book, and also even, you know, up until Christmas, and then even after that I was doing revisions and edits and that sort of thing. So I have a lot of books I've started and stopped and trying to come back to. I am reading a book by Bill Gammage. I think it's called The Biggest Estate on Earth, which I've been trying to read, or trying to get to read, for a number of years, and that's amazing. It's about Aboriginal land management of the continent, and it's an incredible book. I wish I'd read it before I wrote this, because I think I would have done some things, gone about some things differently in the way I wrote about country and how people treat country. But that's incredible. That's really changing the way I see things and think about things. What else? I'm reading a journal of Maori writers here, which is called Te Whē ki Tukorehe. Tukorehe is a place, it's a marae sort of north of Wellington. And that's a collection of writing by Maori writers and talking about or looking at writing from a Maori worldview and centering your writing in that perspective. And again, that's really interesting to me, especially because there's so much consideration given to the people that you might speak for or the people whose stories you might be telling. Really, really interesting. I'm reading a lot of new work in progress by friends who are writers, and I've got a stack of books. Oh, I'm looking forward to Trent Dalton's book, All Our Shimmering Skies. I've got that waiting for me. I haven't read it yet, but I'm not even opening it, but that's sitting there waiting. So
we over the last year mostly, we did a whole series of author talks called Southern Deadly Yarns. I don't know if you heard about them, but we had lots of Aboriginal authors come on and talk about their books, and we're starting a new series of that very soon.
fantastic.
And all of those recordings are on our website, but the new lot of the new round of authors coming up will be all on our Eventbrite page and things. So
That's great.
When you just mentioned that, I thought about the Bruce Pascoe book.
Yeah.
Because we interviewed him and he was extremely successful and popular with everyone. So
absolutely.
and it does make you really think about the practices that have been lost as well, with the land management especially.
Absolutely.
Because we didn't really pay any attention to what they were doing and didn't really value what they did. So it's sort of coming to light more and more now that we've got the history wrong a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you're right. Well, that's his book is the one that led me to this book. So probably the same for a lot of people. It's like, but go back, look at that too. So, yeah. I was actually talking about sort of inspiring writers. I remember sometime in 2017, I read a lot of interviews with him as well as after that book, and I remember him saying something really talking about. I don't want to misquote him. He said something about how Australia needs writers or maybe novelists who are true to land.
Yes.
And I thought about that so much, especially because I live here now and I have lived here for a long time. And I kept wondering whether I could do that and how I could do that. But I really thought about it, and it was it was such a great sort of provocation, I thought.
Yes, definitely worth more discussion, more talking, more exposure for everyone, I think, in that area. I think I have one or two more questions. Can you tell us a bit about the new book you're writing?
Yeah, I can. I can tell you it's taking a long time. I keep starting it and stopping, and it's Australian again. I don't know when I'm going to get around to writing. I don't know how long I'll have to be back here before I feel like I can write something that's here. It is about a woman who goes back to the place she grew up in after a long time, and what I'm you're always so I don't know, so imprecise trying to talk about this stuff because it's sort of in the making. But what I'm really interested in is, I guess, the legacy of violence. I guess the way an act of violence can be aimed at somebody, but it sort of ripples out and it can affect so many other people. It can affect a whole community, a whole town. How those acts can travel through time. They can affect another generation. And so, I suppose that's what this character is trying to reckon with, acts of violence from the past. That doesn't sound much fun, does it?
No, but sounds very intriguing.
I'm really, really enjoying it, and actually, I'm going on a train. I've got an 8-hour train trip coming up. Well, I've got a 16-hour train trip, 8 hours in each direction coming up this week, and so I think I'm going to get some work done.
That's excellent. So that I can't wait to read that one as well.
Oh, God.
I need Unsheltered first. Okay, so my last question for all those viewers out there, what advice could you give to someone who is hoping to get published?
Well, considering, I feel qualified because it took me a long time. I think the most useful piece of advice I think I wish I'd given myself was that you're a writer when you're writing, not just when someone wants to read your work. And I had to tell myself that a lot, because it's so easy if you're trying to publish a work and it's not happening. It's very hard not to take it personally. You shouldn't take it personally, but you do. And the one thing that worked for me, was to be working on something new. So, this book that I'm writing now, I've been writing it on and off for a couple of years, and every time I get I'd get somewhere with it, I'd end up coming back and revising this other one or something. But when I'm working on something, I'm a writer, and that's fine. And a lot of writers I've talked to have felt the same way. So I think that would probably be the advice I'd give people. It might happen for you really quickly, and that's great if it does. But if it doesn't, just keep working on something. Keep something going. Keep something cooking. And kia kaha, we say over here. So, be strong.
That is good advice. Very good. Okay, well, I think we've reached the end. There's no more questions come through. Everyone is still hanging around. So I'm going to just wrap up by saying thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Claire, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I will send out a Feedbackly form, the online feedback, to all of our participants. If you can fill that in, that would be great. And obviously, if you want to know more about any author talks we're doing, follow our Facebook page on Kapringa Libraries and look at our website. All our events are on Eventbrite. You can book in from basically anywhere in the world, and hopefully we'll be getting we've got some really cool authors coming up too, some from England that have written some books about trees. So we're doing a bit of a tree theme later in May and June. So they are available for bookings as well. So thank you very much, Claire. It's been really nice talking to you today. Good luck with your book and your upcoming books. And I hope you sell lots of them and get lots of good reviews and feedback.
Thanks very much.
All right, we'll chat soon.
For coming.
Bye.
Bye.